All right, let's take a look at Monday night game between the Giants and Seattle Seahawks. Just refresh here to make sure I have all the latest data. The record of the Seattle Seahawks is 2-1. Giants are 1-2. Kind of an auspicious start for the Giants. Not sure why they were kind of hyped up at the beginning of the year in some circles. They are ranked low, and they showed it against really good teams that they can't do much, and then they showed against not so good teams they're kind of dynamic. The spread, for whatever reason, is missing here, but we're looking at the Seahawks are favored to win by 2 points. Over-under is 47 points, so I would assume it's like 24-20 is the assumption for the score at the end of the game. 24 or whatever, 25, 22, 21, somewhere in that neighborhood. So a couple touchdowns and a couple field goals likely. 47.5 is nothing to sneeze at, so, there will be some scoring in this game, according to Vegas anyway. And I kind of agree with that. Neither defense is all that spectacular, and they both have some serious offensive weapons. Obviously, New York without Saquon Barkley, which is a big deal, but everybody else is healthy, other than their left tackle, Andrew Thomas, which does make a difference. But the rest of their line is pretty healthy. We'll get into like stats in terms of like sacks they've given up, etc. Because they give up a lot, and it makes it hard for Daniel Jones to make throws. However, Seattle, they are not sack monsters by any means. They're ranked 23rd in the league, and so not too much of a concern. The quarters, so both teams kind of have relatively mediocre to bad defenses. So that should bode well in terms of a high-powered game here, or an offensive game. Of course, that could all go to hell. We could end up with like 6-9, something like that. You never know. But in terms of odds and probabilities, we're looking at some good quarterback play today, at least in terms of points. Okay, so let's just get into the basics. We will look at the Giants on offense first. So they are ranked last in pass points, last in reception points, and 25th in rushing points. Saquon did have a big game when they did have a good game. Nobody else has really had massive games other than Daniel Jones. We'll get into that in a second. But you can see they tend to rush less than pass. I would say that's about a 60-40 split. Rushing attempts primarily go to Saquon. And then Brieda, even as the starter last week, barely had any action. Brightwell also very low on the list. I think he does have one touchdown, though, so he's not someone you can rule out. As far as passing, Darren Waller is their top target, but he also doesn't have many points. Darius Slayton is next in line at 17. Paris Campbell, very minimal points. We'll go over the histories in a second so you can see all those. He spreads the ball around and then doesn't make many points out of it anyway, but they've faced some good defenses so far. Like, they played San Francisco and then Detroit and Arizona, who somehow had that was a miraculous comeback game. That was a weird one. So then when they want to put up points against a bad defense, they can, but not against a good defense. Thankfully for New York, Seattle is not considered a good defense. It could all change tonight once they play a team like New York, but we'll look through their history too to see who they've faced and see if that should hold true or not. I don't think it will. Again, I hate putting my assumptions out there because I don't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction, but statistically, they're just not that good. And here is Seattle on the defensive side of the ball. They're ranked 27th against the pass, or against passing points, so against quarterbacks. 30th against reception points, and 18th against rushing. So not a good team, not a good defense. I mean, not a terrible team, but, again, it'll play out. In terms of who they're giving their points up to, they give up a lot of points to receivers in any tier. So just because you have a low-tier guy and he's matching up against Seattle, that doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to score a lot of points. They've given up over 20 points, like over 17, over 15 a couple times, so there's options for everybody here. You can see against positions, they are ranked pretty low. Tight end is not a good indicator of future or past performance because it's a high variance position, so they're kind of right in the middle of the road there. That doesn't really pose any plus or negative for Darren Waller. I think he's just a must-play anyway because he's one of their top targets. But, this isn't going to make a big difference against wide receivers, however. We could see they gave up a big game to Amon-Ra. He had 7 targets for 102 yards. Even Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds had good games. Josh Reynolds had 2 touchdowns against them, 6 for 66. So that was a big game. Against Carolina, nothing massive. 8 targets and 35 yards for Terrace Marshall. But Adam Thielen had a huge game against them, and that's Carolina. So Seattle's going to give up points. And then down to L.A., Tutu Atwell had 8 targets, 119 yards against them. Puka Nacua had 15 targets, 119 yards. So you can pass against this team. They aren't making it hard for your receivers to get points. So, again, another reason I would suspect that this game's going to be high scoring and some good opportunities for Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. As far as against running backs, they gave up pretty good game to David Montgomery. Not a massive game, but that's solid. I would take that from anybody. They gave up, they kind of held Carolina in check a little bit. And then to Cam Akers, I feel like we'll never hear that name again. He had a touchdown, very low yards per carry. And Kyrene Williams, a little bit yards per carry, but 2 touchdowns that game. So he had a big game too. So as far as giving it up to running backs, they will give it up to running backs too. Do I expect a huge game from Matt Breida? No, but I would have him in a couple lineups at least. And then as far as who they've scored or faced at quarterback, they gave up, 35 passing attempts, 323 yards to Jared Goff, and he had 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. So they're not interception hogs either. 58 pass attempts from Andy Dalton for 361 yards. That's a lot of pass attempts. And then Stafford had 300. So they've given up 3 300-yard games. So I would give Daniel Jones a good long look at MVP candidate, as well as just having him on your lineups because he's going to score points this game. It's not going to be a rushing game for them. They don't have their workhorse, but they are going to probably hit Darren Waller a lot, and Daniel Jones will probably run the ball quite a bit. That I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but there's definitely opportunity for them to score on this defense, even though they have a very super talented linebacker here in Bobby Wagner. They still give up the points. Let's swap sides of the ball. Seattle on offense. Pass ranked 24th. Reception ranked 29th for points. Rush ranked 19th. Which is surprising because Kenneth Walker is actually having a pretty good year. Like, he's a top-tier running back. And I guess we'll just look again at their history, who they've had to face, to determine why he's not cranking out more points than that. But they also tend to pass a little bit more than rush. Top target is Tyler Lockett. He doesn't have a lot of points, but he's their top target. Pretty close to DK Metcalf. And then Jackson Smith Njigba. Third in line with Kenneth Walker at 4th with 10 targets. And the rest kind of distributed You have to look at their tight ends today. They are considered questionable. Not like they're major point scorers, but you got to have them in a couple lineups. You never know when they'll score a touchdown, so you don't want to miss that. But make sure that they are healthy before you put them in there. And again, on the rushing side of the ball, it's all Kenneth Walker, a little bit of Charbonnet. Maybe for whatever reason they switched it up a little bit today. I don't see that happening. And they definitely have plenty of opportunity to run on the Giants defense, who's ranked 30th against the rush, 13th against receptions, and 14th against pass. So better against receivers than they are the rush, but that could just be people getting out so far ahead. I mean, they played Dallas, who just like scored tons of points on defense against them. So not a good, huge indicator. They are healthy, though. So at least they got that going for them. Quarterback against quarterbacks ranked 13th. So far they've faced, again, Dak Prescott. Joshua Dobbs had an okay game, 228 yards, not huge. See, Dak Prescott didn't even do that well against them. He didn't have to. That was kind of a weird game for Dallas offense. They've since done a lot better, but I don't know. I'm not going to get too much into how I feel about Dallas. Brock Purdy, 310 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, something to look at. I think Geno Smith will also have a good game. I don't see why not. They will rely on Kenneth Walker. I think he'll be a focal point for sure. But also a lot of opportunity for Geno Smith to get some decent stats in this game. Against running backs, they are ranked 27th. And that was against Tony Pollard. They gave up 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against James Conner, this game hurt because I was up against James Conner that day. 23 attempts for 106 yards and a touchdown. That's a pretty significant game. McCaffrey, 18 attempts for 85 yards, a touchdown, and then also 5 targets for 34 yards. So that was a big game. So they've faced good running backs. Is Kenneth Walker on par with those guys? Yeah. Are the lines, is the Seattle Seahawks offensive line on par with these guys? They're at least on par with Arizona. So there's definitely opportunity for Kenneth Walker to have a really good game. So I do look to see him score a significant amount of points, or at least get a significant amount of volume. What happens from there is up to the fantasy gods. Against wide receivers, they have given up not massive games. CeeDee Lamb, 4 targets, 77 yards. He's their deep threat, so one of those is probably a big chunk of that. Marquise Brown, 10 for 54. Debo had a really big game against them, 12 for 129 and a touchdown. So they are also susceptible to giving up points to wide receivers. We kind of know that, though. Again, tight end, just kind of a mishmash. They haven't really played anybody. George Kittle is very up and down in terms of if they decide to utilize him. He's an amazing player, but they don't always look his way. But he did have a good game against them. 9 targets for 90 yards. That's pretty good. So opportunity, not that Seahawks utilize their tight ends much, but Fant does come up every once in a while. So does Will Dissly. But we may be looking at their second and third string guys. Brady Russell doesn't have any snaps this year, but maybe he will if Fant or Dissly is out. They're both questionable, and it doesn't look like, from what I've read, is Dissly's a little bit more likely than Fant, but these aren't guys you're going to have on tons of your lineups anyway. They're not make or break guys for us. So just make sure that if they do play, they are there, and if they don't, that you don't. A little bit banged up on the line on Seattle's side, so that could make a difference. Evan Brown, limited participant, quadriceps injury, so just keep an eye on him. Looks like they have a doubtful for their starting left tackle. Toe listed as doubtful, so there's some injuries here on the Seattle front that you got to pay attention to. Will that make it harder to run against the Giants? Maybe it'll make it harder to pass against them. Maybe. Definitely something to keep in mind. As far as right tackle, we went over that. Wide receiver, everybody is available for the Seahawks except Derek Young here, who I don't think he has many targets anyway. Did we look at that? Let's see, Derek Young. I don't even see him here on the target list, so not a big deal. Not someone you're really going to play anyway. Jake Bobo. He does get a couple targets. He's had 3 targets, and I think he has a touchdown too. So let's look at that really quick. So anyway, injuries, not huge impact, maybe for the Seattle line. So he might get a couple more sacks out of the Giants. They are ranked 30th in sacks. So, again, that could be who they've faced. They've faced some good teams in terms of their line play so far with Dallas, Arizona. Again, not great, but they outperform their talent, that's for sure, in San Francisco. Those are good lines, so maybe facing Seattle gives them an opportunity to catch up a little bit in the sack department. Let's look at their histories. So Seattle Seahawks so far this year have played LA, where Metcalf, this is the game they lost. Metcalf only had 12 points. They had a really low scoring output game. 26 pass attempts for 16 completions, 112 yards and a TD. That's really low. Metcalf only 5 targets. Metcalf doesn't get a lot of targets this year. 5 targets in that game, 6 in this game, 8 in this game. I guess that's not too bad. But Lockett is the target leader so far. He didn't, but they spread it around. Let's just kind of focus in on wide receivers here for a second. Jackson Smith with 5 targets in that first game. He also had 6 targets in the game against Detroit, and then 3 targets and 1 completion against Carolina. That's a game that DK kind of rose to the occasion. Tyler Lockett is their main target guy, but 10 targets for 8 completions and 59 yards isn't a lot of yards for that many targets, so maybe they're just dumping off short. Tyler Lockett's kind of I don't know. We got to see how he's going to play out in this game. I do assume he's going to get his targets. Each game he gets at least, the floor was 4, and he's got 10 and 7, so you got to assume they're going to chuck the guy the ball. He just doesn't seem to pick up a lot of yards or with those targets. Like 10 for 8 for 60, that's like 8 yards per target or something. But he did have 2 touchdowns in that game. And here's Jake Bobo, 2 targets, 1 completion, 1 touchdown, 7 points. The way he's priced, if you get that completion and that touchdown, could be your guy that helps you win. But I kind of feel more people are going to score. The winning lineup's not going to have that low of a score on it. So, he's a flyer, a super dart, but maybe. I will have him on a couple lineups myself, depending on how the math works. So that is Seattle Seahawks, wide receiver. Let's look at their tight end position. So, again, they have some injuries. They don't target their tight ends that much, although in the last game, here's 4 targets in this game. And remember that there weren't that many passes. There was 26 attempts, so that's a chunk. In this game, they targeted their tight ends 10 times, and then here also 10. So, it'll get around to their tight ends, but don't expect a lot from these guys. Like, look at these point totals. 7, 1, 5, 5, 6, and 1. No touchdowns so far for these guys. Again, these probably won't be winning scores for you, but if Noah picks up a touchdown in this game, we're talking 14 points, and then that is a recommendation. Let's look at running backs. So again, Kenneth Walker, that first game, they just sucked butt. But since then, he's been hot. And I will let out of the bag that I am playing against him this weekend, and I'm 9 points up, and he's the last player. And I'm not happy about that because I just don't see him not scoring at least 9. I'd say his floor is like 12, and he could have a big game. Big game. He had one last week with 18 attempts, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 targets for 3 completion of 59. I don't see him hitting that again. I feel like New York's a little bit better than Carolina on defense, but he could have a big game. And then here's Charbonnet he got 9 attempts, 46 yards. So DJ getting in the mix a little bit. So not a lot of attempts for their second and third guys, but again, you got to have at least a lineup or two with these guys on there. So that is it for the Seahawks side of the ball. Let's look at the Giants. So Saquon, again, is out. He's not a thing. And then when Matt started for him, he only had 4 attempts for 17 yards. That's against San Francisco, though. So he did have a touchdown, so that took him out of the really crappy realm. But not a lot going on there. But that's San Francisco. Again, Seattle, a lot more prone to give up yards to running backs and points. For receiving, Brightwell is kind of a target out of the backfield. They both are. But, it could pick up a couple points. Again, you throw a touchdown in that, then it's feasible. But without it, these guys are just kind of also flyers. I wouldn't look at these two as like main people, but I will definitely sprinkle them in a little bit. Let's see if they played last year. They did play once. And Geno Smith led the way for Seattle with 19 points. Tyler Lockett was their main point scorer, but just barely over DK. DK with 2 more targets. They both had touchdowns. So, I'd probably look to replicate this line again, except maybe a little bit more for Kenneth Walker. So this might be a preview of what we're going to look at in terms of output here. I definitely have all these guys as potential MVPs for this game. So I like this game because there's so many potential MVPs. Hopefully the first place doesn't get split 50 ways and everybody walks away with like $50 after entering for $100 of lineups. On the other side of the ball, Saquon, who's not there, had 13 points. So Seattle did manage to bottle them up a little bit. This is in October last year, so a long ways away from today. A bit has changed since then. Slayton, 6 targets. So, yeah, Saquon, 20 attempts, 53 yards. Again, though, remember, Seattle has given up big games to running backs this year. I don't know if they've lost any particular players that have made that possible, but they just are more susceptible this year. But, if last year's indication is much, maybe not a good play for Matt Breida. I don't think it's a great play anyway, but they even held Saquon pretty low. It looks like Darius Slayton was playing. They have just a whole new set of receivers. Wandale's still there. He only had 3 targets. They didn't do much last year against Seattle, but this is in the beginning of the year, so things change. Their defense or their offense definitely picked it up as they went along. Brightwell, nothing, just 1 snap. Richie James Jr., 4 snaps. So, yeah, not a lot going on last year. Kind of a slow game, but the over-under is much higher this year, so they are expecting them to outperform at least what they've done before. Let's look at the aperture. So as far as the spread, Seattle have super talented guys in Lockett and Metcalf, and the corners for New York are talented. Not bad. Not bad at safety either. So, these guys are definitely more talented, and Metcalf's way bigger than anybody they have by 2 inches at least. Also by weight, he's just kind of a freak at 235. So they could muscle it into him. So I do assume Metcalf will have a big game. And Tyler Lockett could break one too. But I kind of see, I don't know. Again, I hate giving predictions because those are the things that get you in trouble. I just like to point out what statistics exist. But I do think Metcalf will have a good game. There, I said it. Other side of the ball. Again, this like ragtag group over here, other than Darren Waller, who is their top target. So I do expect Waller to get 6, 7 targets. If averages apply, and I think he'll do better. I'm hoping him and Daniel Jones are building the rapport to some extent. On Seattle's side of the ball, not like crazy, well, very talented free safety, and somewhat talented at cornerback with a little bit of injury going on in the backfield there, or in the secondary. So, definitely opportunity for all those receivers in this game. Where does New York like to throw it? 41% of the time to the right, 33% of the time to the left, 24% of the time down the middle. To their wide receivers, 60% of the time, 17% of the time to their tight ends, 22% of the time to the running backs. Again, that's with Saquon, but he does not exist there. But I think that will be made up for split amongst Brightwell and Breida. As far as where they like to run to, they like to run off the right side here. Not so much as in the middle or the left, but definitely like the edges preferred. Seattle likes to throw it to the right as well. 41% of the time, 21% of the time up the middle, 36% of the time to the left, 60% of the time to wide receivers, 24% of the time to tight ends, and 15% of the time to their running backs. Although I see Gainwell kind of bumping that statistic up. He has a good amount of targets this year. And as far as rushing, it looks like they go up the middle more than anything, the middle and to the right. But they aren't too healthy in the middle. So, and then New York has a talented nose tackle, Dexter Lawrence, sitting there waiting to gobble up those running backs. So I still see Kenneth having a lot of volume this game. They must be outperforming their talent, because I don't see huge talent here. The questionable tag and the doubtful tag are, an issue. I would look at that, but all things considered, people are thinking Kenneth Walker is going to have a good game. Maybe there's a game you fade on account of this, but we will see. So we've looked at rushing gaps, etc. And I think that's most of the stats. That's so basically this comes down to like a pretty wide open game in terms of who might be the captain. And we're going to expect a lot of points, and I hope this information helps you make some decisions. Good luck today.